Well, this is interesting. Some growing outrage now as Saudi Arabia is set to join the UN's leading women's rights organization. Members are electing the Middle Eastern kingdom to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. It is one of 12 new countries chosen by secret ballot. The commission promotes gender equality and the empowerment of women. The four-year position comes despite that country's being ranked as one of the worst for gender equality. Women in Saudi Arabia are required by Sharia law to wear a head covering, are not allowed to get a driver's license or drive, must get male permission to travel abroad, marry, and be released from prison. They sometimes need male permission to work or get health care, and they cannot file legal claims or rent an apartment. Okay, Ambassador, what is going on at the UN? You've been there. What's happening?
Look, in Saudi Arabia, they're very concerned about the status of women. They want to make sure it stays exactly the way it's been for the last 1,000 years or so. Why shouldn't they be on the Commission on the Status of Women?
Wow.
This just shows how jaded I am. Nobody should be surprised at this. This is why much of what goes on at the UN is not reformable. And for those who say Trump has made a mistake by proposing large cuts in the contributions that the U.S. makes to the UN, not just to the CSW, but kind of across the board, that's the only way you're going to get their attention.
Well, look, this week he met with UN ambassadors at the White House. I believe that was yesterday. And he has made comments at that time and has previously said that with great reform, there's fantastic potential for the UN. But they tend not to get anything solved, were his words. So now you're dealing with nations, Megan, where women have technically no rights that we have here in the United States the way that we know it. Like driving is pretty basic. It's not a right, but it's an achievement that we can have here in the United States. It's punishable over there.
Not being stoned in the street, being able to drive, not being forced into marriage as a child if your father says it's okay. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I was actually deeply offended by this, and I'm not easily offended, but the idea that we should include them in anything having to do with women's rights. One of my biggest issues with Hillary Clinton was the fact that she took money from Saudi Arabia and claimed to be this big proponent of women's rights and this big feminist icon while still engaging, you know, economically with this country. I don't want anything in Western culture to take on anything in this realm whatsoever. It's the same reason why I'm for people not being allowed to wear burqas in France. I don't think this way of life and this culture in this sense and the way they treat women is socially acceptable or humane in any conceivable way at all. And I actually think I was a person who thought that it was kind of ridiculous what President Trump originally said about the UN, but look at his beliefs coming true to form.
Is this evidence
that maybe we should?
So getting back to that comment, you talked about how the president said that the UN has tremendous potential, but he said that shortly after criticizing its recent handling of events in North Korea and Syria. He said, you just don't see the UN solving conflicts. I think that's going to start happening now, putting some optimism in the UN. Do you have any? The
president is a very optimistic man. I am not when it comes to the UN. So good luck on that score. But remember, on the Commission on the Status of Women as well, this is also a way for the UN, and I think this is what happened historically, to put women's issues to the side. 25 years ago, I went to my first CSW meeting, went up, said hello to the U.S. delegation. One of the ladies on the delegation said, look around this room and tell me what the problem is. So I looked around the room. I said, I don't see a problem. She said, it's filled with women.
You know what's so interesting?
It's filled with women. And I was too dense to see it, but her point was they're making it irrelevant. And it hasn't gotten any better since then.
Taya and I were talking about this in the green room before the show. And Taya, what's interesting about what the ambassador just said is the fact that you have women now on this council that are starting at baseline zero. To try to change things. When are they going to get to the rest of everybody else who's not at that baseline?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting point is I'd like to see the woman from Saudi Arabia in the conversations, not a man talking about women's rights in Saudi Arabia. And usually I really don't care which gender is in any position. It just is not relevant to me. But for that particular one, that would go a long way. And when I thought about that, as you said, Harris, we were talking about it saying, well, but would she really have the right to say what she wanted to say? And I agree with you. And then we thought, well, wait a minute, though. Is it a starting place? Does it open up the conversation? She would have to be incredibly strong. She might not be able to say everything she wants to say. But it's a start. She might be, right? But we would notice that difference.
She's willing to stand in that gap, these women who are coming from some of these other countries. But again, what they're working on are not necessarily the issues that many women around the world are working on.
I think
as the ambassador said, will anything get done?
If you're still stoning women in the street and you're going to sell them as children to marriages, you have no business on anything with women's rights anywhere.
Drop the mic right there. It just bounced and hit me in the chin.